waiting for you.
Alan, you having a nightmare.
That's the last thing we want to do.
Don't you understand? You're a machine, Alan, a mechanical device. Is that straight enough for you?
I read you loud and clear.
Alan, you idiot.
Green Crush, thanks for tuning in, turning it on, turning it up. I think we're heading into our swan song of shows here. We have definitely several more planned. And then after that, I don't know. I don't know, because I had to take Paul Flynn out of there telling us to break the law. Because I've been doing that and recommending you also do it when it comes to these punks laying down this arbitrary screed from the Queen. Welcome to Canada, everybody listening around the world. I've got some great news for you, and I've got some bad news for you, and let's just call it the same thing. The great news is we are going to be spending a lot more time going into your area. So if you have some cannabis news and cannabis laws of interest and cannabis ways and means regarding the impending legalization in your area, California, I know it's already legal there to much of an extent, but let's not kid ourselves. It's not wholesale perfect anywhere, but some places are certainly more intelligent than Canada about it. A lot of states are. Portugal certainly is. These pigs that sit atop the power pole, we're going to be spending some time talking about that today with our guest, Jodie Emery. Yes, right, she's the Princess of Pot of Canada. And like I said, the good news being that after this interview, number 20 of Green Crush, it's time to spend far less time on this shitberg of a hellhole called Canada that's being, the new cannabis laws are being ushered in by a bona fide 100% G20 human rights abuser in the name of Bill Blair. He's a cop. He's too much of a pussy to answer any of his tweets, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Probably shouldn't have said that. Probably would have taken it out of a pre-recorded broadcast, so you can tell I'm live. I don't mean any offense to the P word. Let me recategorize this. I think Bill Blair is such a punk that he is such a chicken shit that when they did a cross-country tour across Canada to explain to us how legalization was going to work, and to explain to us how it was going to go down financially, and purportedly they wanted to hear our opinion on their legislation as well. So, of course, they booked a cross-Canada tour, popping into various different vicinities, and as I've mentioned before, I pay a little more attention to those kind of things than lots of people that don't care about cannabis legislation. And I missed the meeting in my neighborhood because I didn't find out about it until the next day. Now, why is that? Because I'm not paying attention? Sometimes. Can't take it all in. Don't claim to. But they announced they were doing the tour on the justice.gov website of Canada. And then they didn't tell anybody other than the media and local cops, both on and off duty, where these fucking meetings were going to be held. So they've been disingenuous from the top. We're going to focus today a little segment called Cops or Truth. We'll get that done before Jodie comes on. Jodie, of course, marginalized herself. She is marginalized, I should say, because once upon a time she got under arrest trying to bring cannabis to all of us. And these criminals in this regime that are basically flipping the entire, it's like you're looking in a mirror and then all of a sudden you're looking in a window and it's hard to tell the difference. They've done this with the laws, and they've marginalized Jodie out of even being able to be a legal vendor of products based in cannabis because she has a criminal record. And she has a criminal record because it was given to her by criminals. She got busted a long time ago when the laws were different. But now we're supposed to believe that because the laws are changed, that these new profiteers who were previously getting in the way of folks accessing medical cannabis or any kind of cannabis, that she had to pay a price. And that price is that now that she and her husband Mark and many others who've been working so hard to bring the awareness that we all have the right to consume this plant, even if your local politician doesn't think so, even if they're falsely emanating and emitting noxious fumes by way of bogus opinion. Even if that's the case, you just have to stand up and take what's yours. I did that in front of the Premier of Ontario last week, and it was nice watching her struggle for a few minutes. If you want to check out episode 19, pretty close to the beginning, you'll see that. And doesn't really hold her to account, though. I mean, I was able to actually speak with her, and it's because I had spent so many times trying to tweet her, calling her office, etc., never getting any kind of reply. So she took a town hall. And what it works all down to is between the premiers of the provinces and these cops who incredibly were consulted first regarding legalization. You'd figure they'd be the last ones. Like, okay, you guys aren't going to be so much so in control of the picture right now, so we're going to talk to the patients and we're going to talk to people who have been benefiting from the experience of using it. We're going to talk to the people who know how to run dispensaries instead of calling them criminals. It's all about hypocrisy, but more so than that, why are so few hypocrites controlling the rest of us normal people? And we'll talk about that later, how they were able to do this, why they're doing it, and upon whose behalf they are doing it. You got to get over this notion you live in a democracy. Anybody listening to me isn't, because you're either under control in a place where you think it's a democracy, or you're listening in some other place where you know it's not a democracy, but you're still able to hear the show. And no, we won't be having any guests on from China, because I don't believe this is cracking through their firewall, the great firewall of China. Oh, some coffee. Yes, so let me just explain to you what's going on here with our guest. It's Jodie Emery, the Princess of Pot, and we're going to find out where she came from and what she's all about and why it is that she is now marginalized as a player and a purveyor in the legal cannabis market that has 45 new laws. 45 new laws. That's how free and legal it is. So tell yourself what you want. You're probably making a mistake. It is not free at all. So before we move on to Jodie, I do have a couple of things I need to get going here. Let's say that we'll do a commercial for the Truth Seeker app. Have you ever taken a look at the Truth Seeker app? Here's a news source that's not mainstream and also doesn't hold to any one particular point of view. There are some pretty lefty swinging shows on there, some pretty conservative-oriented shows there, as people try to parse the reality as not presented to them by CNN and the mainstream. So they have gotten on board with my previous show, Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. Now we're at Green Crush with Alan Park. And happy to say that Truth Seeker is happy to be involved with us, and we're happy to be involved with them, and that's just on a say-so basis. I like what they do, and they seem to like the show, so check out the Truth Seeker app. It's an Android app, and it's also an iOS Mac app if you want to get one of those hooked up to your Cadilla Bopper. So that's a Truth Seeker app. Also, we are coming to you live from Eggplant Digital Studios, Canada's finest media creation facility. It's actually more of a laboratory. You should check it out sometime. And we are coming to you live from 234 King Street East in Toronto, right here at the Pacific Junction Hotel. Try the coffee, try the food, talk to the staff. They're pretty cool. And that's us at Truth Seeker, Eggplant Digital, and now I guess all the commercials are out of the way. Oh, here's one more. I understand a lot of people are tight for cash, and haven't been able to contribute and don't want to and whatever it is, and I get all that. I'll just keep on pretending I could do this for free forever and at some cost. But I'll tell you what, it would be really great if you could go over to iTunes anyway and just dial up the show and find out where you can comment on the show. And it might help us out some if you can put in some positive words there for us on iTunes. Okay, so now let's move to you like that music? It's pretty cool. I'm gonna say I like it. It's kind of funny to me, but it's also very cool. So this is the 20th show, and with this show we are bidding a loving farewell to this Canadian shithole that Justin Trudeau spent so much time lying. And by the way, if you're coming here from some other country and you want to move here, and female genital mutilation is your bag of tricks of fun, you can definitely come here and do that. They're taking the strictures about that out of the Canadian Citizenship Guide. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. You don't have to drop all your old habits to move here to this country. So representing the fundamental differentiation which creates in the world two relatively antagonistic poles, it's number 20. Number 20 is the episode here. It's often called the devil to say that the material world as opposed to the spiritual world is represented by number 20. It's ominous for St. Jerome. It indicates the universal fight and represents the source energy of all of the world. So that's what episode 20 is about. Isn't that cool? So here we go with some of the news roundup. I just want to do a quick news roundup from the Globe and Mail in Canada before we leave our focus. And if you're a Canadian listener, don't worry. We'll still cover Canada in a tiny little segment somewhere in the future shows. But it really doesn't warrant much more attention. The idiots are at the helm, and they're not listening, as evidenced by my run-in with Kathleen last week, as evidenced by anybody contradicting what this prime minister says, and contradicting what his lackey, punk, puffy cop, leader of the legalization of cannabis. I mean, you couldn't write this shit. It's so bad. Here's a guy that has profited and enjoyed busting people for years, and now he's in charge of changing the rules on how we bust them. So let's just take in the Globe and Mail. The G20 report. You remember when all the countries came here, they blast the police for unlawful arrests and civil rights violations. This is in the rather conservative mainstream Globe and Mail. Of course, it's a little old here. It's from 2012. They were talking about what Bill Blair presided over and exercised and influenced when he was a G20 human rights abuser before he went unpunished and is now further abusing rights by making up a construct of bullshit laws that is making something quite wonderful, quite illegal, and only focusing on the bad part of it. Like you would do to a glass salesman who wanted to replace a window in your car or house. You could just err on the side of negativity and say, oh no, I don't want glass. It can break. It can be broken. It can be fashioned into a weapon. It can be swallowed. It can be ground up into someone's food. Oh my God, no. We can't have glass. There's going to be a glass regulatory body. And once you've shown that you're able to both install and properly use glass, then you'll be able to apply to the government to get a license to sell glass and to use glass. And anyone caught with a window without this permit will face reprimand from the government, is how fucked these laws are here. That's how. So back to 2012. This is a report 2 years after the fact. The unspanked Bill Blair. This isn't an opinion. It's just the report. Police violated civil rights, detained people illegally, and used excessive force during the G20 summit of 2010. A report concludes. It's not an opinion. It's not a hunch. But some caught up in the police operation said there was no real accountability for their mistreatment because Bill Blair got to slink on out of here tap into a bottle of Jameson's, make a few phone calls, get on Justin's team, and become this asshole who is now ushering in this corporate, pig-heavy threat of controlling what I refuse to have controlled in that way, in a personal manner anyhow. And I encourage you all to do the same. The report by Ontario's independent police watchdog also blasts the temporary detention center set up by the cops for its poor planning, design, and operation that saw people detained illegally. Now, to be fair, the fact that the police exercised poor planning and design and operation, that's kind of inherent. That kind of goes with the turf. They don't go looking for geniuses when they're hiring cops on the beat. The Office of the Independent Police Review Director found police breached several constitutional rights, which is amazing when you consider that this punk is now further breaching constitutional rights during the tumultuous event in which more than 1,100 people were arrested, most to be released without charge. That's what these idiots are doing now with Project Claudia, and of course we have the current lying police officer saying that that's not happening, that all the charges are going through. He's committed to this. He said all of the charges are going through. They're not dropping anything, he said, while they're dropping things. Some police officers ignored basic rights citizens have under the charter and overstepped their authority when they stopped and searched people arbitrarily and without legal justification. It's a 300-page detailed look at the events of that weekend and finds that the protesters were not the only ones who resorted to violence. Numerous police officers used excessive force when arresting individuals and seemed to send a message that violence would be met with violence. The reaction created a cycle. So listen to that. The reaction, in other words, the action of the police, created the cycle of escalating responses from both sides. The report takes aim at police tactics at the provincial legislature, which had been set up in advance as a protest zone because it was nowhere near where these people were carving up the pie. The force used for crowd control and in making arrests was, in some cases, excessive, and a lot of people have been paid off for this, rightfully so. A lot of people took their ass to court and got money. But Bill Blair still came away unscathed somehow. It's fair to say the level of force used in controlling the crowds and making arrests was higher than anything the general public had witnessed before in Toronto. Higher than anything. I think Bill Blair must be higher than anything if he thinks that this thing is going to go unchecked. I don't give a shit that it's already passed through 3 readings of the House and now awaits senatorial a hello from the Senate as they wave it through. And then, of course, it will only have to pass. Once it's now read 3 times in the parliamentary system, it only has to pass through the Senate, who, despite being heavy stacked with conservatives as opposed to liberal government, it'll probably go through. And then it will require royal assent. This is the final step in this system of ours where the Queen herself says, yeah, that's good. That's the law. And you know what's amazing is they don't always do that with every law. There's a big, fat, juicy law out there that never got royal assent. Never even managed to get 3 readings in the House. A big, fat, juicy law. For any information on that, please Google up The Myth is Canada. The Myth is Canada. This is another project going on right now. It's a documentary film. Go to Facebook, dial up The Myth is Canada. And you'll see there. A lot of these laws are nothing more than a house of cards. They just need someone to know that and give a little tug at the bottom of the pile to watch it all come tumbling down. So take a look at The Myth is Canada. Understand Bill Blair is a criminal, unchecked, roaming the streets, making laws for the rest of us to be held under the knuckle of. Understand that also ex-cops cashing in on new pot laws exposes the hypocrisy of the legislation. So says Metro, another banal across-the-board mainstream paper. You should see the shit they're writing in the alternative news, but I'm trying to keep this palatable for most people. No one can be surprised at the rank self-interest of the police. This isn't a mainstream paper that you read on a commuter train. but it should give the public pause. Well, it does. It's not the public that needs to pause, though. It's these punks passing laws so that other human rights abusers, such as Julian Fantino, who was the police chief, you know, if he played his cards right, he could have been the Bill Blair. He would have done the exact same thing. But he was there before Bill. He also became the chief of Ontario at one point. And good God, did they ever put a lot of people away? And unlike in California and some other places where they're actually addressing the people that were put away to be part of the reconstruction of how this thing's going to be an economy, they're not doing that here. Known for his mishandling of veteran affairs, corruption scandals within his constabulary, and colorful comments on race and marijuana. It was all the blacks. Former Toronto and Ontario Police Chief Julian Fantino is launching a pot business called Alethea. Aleafia. Boycott this motherfucker. Don't buy your weed from Alethea. Tank it. There's other places to go. Put your money somewhere else. Full-on boycott of Alethea. Full-on boycott of LCBO government weed. Full-on boycott of Justin Trudeau's assault on freedom. It exposes not only the personal hypocrisies of Julian Fantino, but also those of the pot legalization process. Because Julian Fantino was launching a pot business with a former Royal Canadian Mounted Police senior leader. I know a lot of people get upset about this pig/cop analogy, but who else do you see at the trough? Establishing years of forceful rule against people who are just taking something that is far less damaging, if at all, compared to alcohol, which these fucking clowns slosh down no problem. There's no vape bars for police that I know of that aren't private, but there sure are cop bars, and you sure know you've made the mistake of walking into one when you do if you're not a cop. So now they're saying a focus on criminalizing personal use rather than public health concerns has contributed to the circumstances that make young black and indigenous people known to police. Along with carding, the illegality of marijuana has introduced more young radicalized, especially black people, to the criminal justice system than is patently fair. Studies show that pot is used by almost every demographic in near equal measure, and yet it is black people, often young male ones, who are disproportionately punished for it. But, you know, that's Julian Fantino. He's a racist ex-cop. But are you really an ex-cop ever? He's an ex-cop, and he's now profiting. And this is disgusting to me, that he is doing this from selling things such as our guest has been involved in, and yet she's a criminal and he's not. Toronto Star, it stinks to high heaven when top cops are shilling pot. Every photograph of these guys, a grinning pair of idiots. So, yeah, that's what we're doing here. We're having cops run the show, and former conservative premiers and ministers also joining the bandwagon. Premier Ernie Eves, he's joined a Jamaican medical marijuana company. Yeah, he's a former progressive conservative premier. I'm sure he spent a lot of time, I'm trying to dig up some clips, talking about how bad it is. But as soon as these freaks understand what's going on, they can't just get into the game and profit from a democratic, burgeoning industry. They have to shut everybody else that knows what they're doing and talking about down and taking it all for themselves. I'm so sorry. There's no other word for that than pig. And by this, I don't mean to insult the actual animal. So let's move on to Mark Saunders. He is the current police chief. He is not. He doesn't have any problem with lying or making mistakes and grand statements in a public forum. That's for sure. So I'm going to point out the hypocrisy of apologizing for the previous police chief of Toronto, 35 years after the fact of some raids that took place in a gay bathhouse, several gay bathhouses back in the day, where, by the way, the law is still on the books that body houses are illegal. They've never taken that law off the books, but they decided no longer to prosecute gay people because gay people and other people came out in a massive protest against what the cops were doing. Now, they basically arrested 283 people, they say 300, ruined their lives for some good period of time. And soon after this, there was a fever pitch where 3,000 or so gay people went onto the streets of Toronto saying, hey, that's enough of this, gay rights now. And the cops had to capitulate. And only 35 years later, a year after they were told no one wanted them in the parade, the gay pride parade, 35 years later, last summer, here's this Mark Saunders apologizing and making it clear that, they didn't really have the right to do that. And it only took them 35 years to admit it. I mean, last year, that's not good enough. The year before that, they 32 years, 33 years, not good enough. 35 years in, he's going to understand that he's made a huge mistake, or his predecessor did. And it's not even clear to him why there are such similarities with oppressing far more people who use cannabis. Several of those gay people, I'm sure, and most of us. There are far more people that use cannabis getting subjugated under these laws than gay people who were subjugated back in the 80s. 3,000 people came out back then to protest what happened to 300. Well, I am calling on everyone to come forward. There are far more than 3,000. There must be at least 50,000 already at this point medical users. So you do the extrapolative math and figure out where it is and when it is that all of us can get to this. Okay, so we're going to listen to Cops or Truth. I'm going to step away for a minute. And then we're going to come back on the other side of Cops or Truth with the very lovely and knowledgeable Jodie Emery. So stick around for this and understand this is a bit of a audio tapestry. I'm not bound in hell to the rules of broadcasting. This is podcasting. And it's a soundscape. And there's a story to be told in there, and it's completely silly, but it's also on point, and I sure hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, we don't want to do anything to scare your children. That's the last thing we want to do. We don't want to scare anybody.
21. Throw me a card for a parking problem.
An apology 35 years in the making. Police raided 4 gay bathhouses in 1981.
Tonight, Chief Mark Saunders is officially apologizing on behalf of the police service and the officers.
The chief began speaking to a crowd of people.
The Toronto Police Service recognizes that February 5th of this year marked the 35th anniversary of one of the largest mass arrests in Canadian history.
Okay, I think I heard a laugh out there somewhere.
Yeah, well, you're hearing one from me. The Toronto Police raids on Toronto bathhouses did not occur on just one evening, but the February 1981 event was the most dramatic of its destructiveness.
Okay, I think I heard a laugh out there somewhere.
Yeah, well, you're hearing one from me. And in a number of men arrested, some 300.
Okay.
An extraordinary community response led to the eventual acquittal of almost everyone arrested that night.
The citizens respond to the challenges of the outside world and its machinations, and we better do something about it.
The 35th anniversary of the 1981 raids is a time when the Toronto Police Service expresses its regret for those very actions.
Okay, I think I heard a laugh out there somewhere.
Yeah, well, you're hearing one from me. It is also an occasion to acknowledge the lessons learned about the risks of treating any part of Toronto's many communities as not fully a part of society.
But even those words are very historic because a Toronto police chief has not in recent memory apologized for any event of the service's doing. Today, even the mayor, John Tory, spoke, saying that that event went against our sense of justice and decency. In his words, we have to remember, acknowledge, and apologize. Today, we spoke to one man who was there that night at the time of the raids.
As Toronto's gay community struggled for equal rights in 1981, Tony Fay was struggling as well with the trauma of his bathhouse arrest.
They were breaking in doors. There was walls smashed. They did everything they could to intimidate us. It was not a good scene.
The officers and the force were wrong to conduct those raids. Fay was one of hundreds handcuffed during those raids, even though he was an employee at the private club. The effects of his arrest lingered for years.
Back then, we had no rights. You could get fired for being gay. You could lose your apartment for being gay. You got thrown out of your home for being gay.
The 35th anniversary of the 1981 raids is a time when the Toronto Police Service expresses its regret for those very actions.
The apology is historic because the raids were a flashpoint in LGBTQ history.
This acknowledges that the police have changed their relationship to the gay community, at least significant parts of the gay community.
Murals have been painted on Church Street depicting the injustice of that night, and the trauma still lingers.
The importance of that particular moment in the history of Toronto.
What we were doing was not wrong, was not illegal, and it just makes us feel better.
But the apology serves as further healing.
It puts some closure to the fact that
there is a tremendous effort from the men and women, both sworn and civilian.
Chief Saunders says there are many lessons that the Toronto Police Service can learn about how to be progressive.
To try to make a positive difference.
Under Project Claudia, and it is still in full effect, the numbers for Project Claudia are not leading to many full-out convictions of any sort, and it's got some people today questioning whether it was worth all the time and money spent.
There was walls smashed. They did everything they could to intimidate us. It was not a good scene.
The officers and the force were wrong to conduct those raids. Hundreds handcuffed during those raids, even though he was an employee at the private club. The effects of his arrest lingered for years.
Back then, we had no rights. You could get fired, you could lose your apartment, you got thrown out of your home.
The 5th anniversary of the raids is a time when the Toronto Police Service expresses its regret for those very actions.
The apology is historic because the raids were a flashpoint in history.
In keeping our service and our communities as safe as we possibly can. This year, I promise you, we will have a great parade. It will be a safe parade.
Struggling as well with the trauma of arrest.
They were breaking in doors.
Last spring's Project Claudia raids on Toronto marijuana dispensaries resulted in numerous arrests, 90 various charges, and a ton of protest and criticism from industry activists.
Struggling as well with the trauma of arrest.
They were breaking in doors.
A little over a year later, the success of those raids is the subject of debate between those activists and municipal authorities.
I'm sorry, folks, but the news flash, which I'll present once again, because I knew that this question was going to come up, it is illegal. It is simply illegal. You can't do it. We will arrest you if you are still selling at dispensaries. This is not about the users. This is about the people that are getting monetary gain because of this window that is there right now, and they're committing criminal offenses. And the prosecutors will be prosecuting, and we will be enforcing. I'm sorry, folks, but the news flash, which I'll present once again, because I knew that this question was going to come up, it is illegal. It is simply illegal.
This is an inconsistency. There is much to be considered. I must re-evaluate.
Do you have any update on the people charged so far, where they are in the process, exact number of people arrested and charged earlier this month with the raids? To your knowledge, at this point, charges been dropped or anything like that? You were pretty confident they were going to all go ahead.
No, nothing's dropped. No.
And the latest figures from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada show that a total of 45 people had their charges stayed or withdrawn outright.
Error. Examine. I shall analyze.
Exact number of people arrested and charged earlier this month with the raid. Charges been dropped or anything like that?
No, nothing's dropped. No. And
3 people at a single dispensary have pleaded guilty and have been sentenced, and 4 matters are still awaiting a trial date. 27 of those charged have had their charges stayed after entering into peace bonds, essentially a promise of good behavior going forward. He feels those numbers show police efforts were too heavy-handed.
If anyone out there is because I'm hearing some narratives where people are saying, oh, you arrested users and people in possession. We did not. Everybody that we arrested in Project Claudia.
Too heavy-handed.
Which is an ongoing investigation, are people that are selling for monetary gain.
Numbers show police efforts were too heavy-handed.
And once again, they have no idea where it's coming from. They have no idea what the regulatory systems are in making it. Don't know if there's mold or any other things that are there that should not be there. They don't know the quality or the level. None of these questions can be answered. Absolutely none of them. And so just because you're in a suit It doesn't mean that you
The
by
fuck
any
are you
means
talking
creating
about?
a lawful. No, nothing's dropped. No,
nothing's dropped.
If anyone out there is because I'm hearing some narratives where people are saying, "Oh, you arrested users and people in possession." We did not. Everybody that we arrested in Project Claudia, which is an ongoing investigation, are people that are selling for monetary gain. And once again,
Bluster,
they have
bluster,
no idea
bluster.
where it's coming from. They have no idea what the regulatory
Yes, we
systems are
do.
in making it. Don't know
You're
if there's mold
lying.
or any other things that are there. that
Oh
should
my
not be
God!
there.
I can't listen to any more of that. Hey, thanks for showing up, Mark. I really appreciate it. So that's cops or truth. It's usually one or the other. All right, let's move on. We do have our guest in studio with us now. I'll tell you a bit about Jodie Emery. She has been fighting for the rights for Canadians to access cannabis. Is that uncomplicated enough for you? I mean, she's going to get into the rest of the details, but she now is being punished by not being able to be a vendor. She'll tell us a little bit more about how that works. I'm going to ask you to lean in. So, Jodie Emery, welcome to Green Crush. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jodie is in let's call it trouble right now. But let's go back to a time when you transitioned from a person that didn't know anything about really cannabis or marijuana or what have you, and how you got into that and what in there. A lot of people do get interested and use it, but not everybody goes as far down the road with activism and awareness as yourself. So just describe that process for us.
Well, in high school, I was against cannabis and against drugs of all kind, and I loved a man in uniform. I was an authoritarian teacher's pet, leadership student, and my best friends started smoking marijuana, so I gave them a very hard time about it. But 9/11 happened, and I realized that my pot-smoking stoner friends were actually more informed than anyone else about international politics, war, the military-industrial complex, and everything. So they were watching Pot TV and reading Cannabis Culture magazine, which were creations of my now husband, Marc Emery. So I started thinking that, maybe these guys aren't so stupid after all if they're the marijuana users. They're smarter than everyone else. So I decided to try marijuana myself and beer as well. I didn't like beer, and so I stuck with weed.
At the same time?
Yep, the same night I finally decided to do that and took a few shots of Pilsner beer because I thought it was so disgusting, but I wanted to try. And yeah, I found cannabis actually worked for me, but it also made me question everything else I'd been told. It started, from a teacher's perspective, I started not being very obedient, I suppose, and not quite the person that they expected. Everyone always thought I would go off, be prime minister someday or law school and all that. So cannabis for me was quite a shift because it changed the way I thought about everything, and it offered me a lot too. So I moved to Vancouver in 2004. I started hanging out at Cannabis Culture headquarters, which is the BC Marijuana Party headquarters. I ran for office with the BC Marijuana Party in 2005 and became the assistant editor of Cannabis Culture magazine that year as well. And then Mark got arrested by the U.S. government, and he and I were in love, so he and I married, and then he got extradited on a 5-year sentence, which was a plea bargain from a 30-year mandatory minimum for sending marijuana seeds through the mail to Americans all over the world.
Hang on a second. A 30-year mandatory minimum.
Yes, he was facing 30 years to life in prison, and the DEA statement said it was because he financed legalization, because he gave millions of dollars away, and he had nothing when they arrested him.
Right.
It was all about making money for the movement, and he was tremendously successful and helped a lot of people and a lot of organizations back in the 90s and early 2000s when it wasn't at all like what we're seeing today. So
it sounds like he was forcing people by knife point to take a poison or something. But you're saying that he was selling seeds to American people who were purchasing this of their own volition in the mail.
And the DEA said that he was the most wanted international drug trafficking kingpin in Canada, one of only 50 in the world. And that's in the DEA's own press release. And meanwhile, Marc Emery has no property, no money, no guns, no drugs, not even a car of his own. He had nothing. The whole point was that he financed legalization. So that's what Cannabis Culture and Pot TV we've always been about that. It's activism for us, but you need money to make a difference in the world. So Mark was always very successful at that. And so when he got out of prison, we decided in order to survive and to be able to give back to the community, we would start something new. So I came up with this dispensary model where we would not be medical. We would be openly for all, non-discriminatory. All adults over 19 can come in and get cannabis no matter what the reason. And that was a beautiful model. It was what legalization should look like. But of course, the government doesn't want us getting away with that. So we were arrested in March of this year, and I'm currently out on bail. Facing serious penalties too, potential life in prison with the mandatory minimums and everything else that they can apply. So obviously trying to work out a good deal of some sort, but even a good deal is still going to be a serious punishment and a hurdle.
Sure.
And the future may not be so friendly for me and many of the other innocent Canadians who have been persecuted by this insane, unjust law. But I'll just keep being an activist then, as always.
Quick question. When Mark was sentenced to a 30-year mandatory minimum, and this is going to sound like the wrong word, but he only did 5. But
he took a 5-year plea deal.
Oh, I see.
And then 2 of his co-accused didn't go to prison at all.
Okay.
And Michelle Rainey died of cancer the year that Mark was extradited to the U.S. So that's what they do. They give you these enormous...
Who is Michelle Rainey?
Michelle Rainey is a medical marijuana activist and his business partner, and she was part of cannabis culture, and same with Greg Williams, marijuana man. So Marc Emery, Michelle, and Greg were the BC3, and all around the world we had international rallies time and time again to say no extradition. So Mark ultimately bargained down a 5-year deal, and plus, all the evidence showed it was a political persecution.
Right.
It was unheard of that a U.S. government could come into Canada and arrest a Canadian here for something done in a country he never went to. So there was this major issue of sovereignty, but that's back in 2005, and for many people, that's ancient history. So, one day the books will come out. There's a lot of movies, though, if people care to find out. The Prince of Pot versus the U.S., all that sort of stuff.
And Pot TV has a lot of people. They interviewed me a while ago, and it's predating YouTube, and it's got a lot of watchers from a long time ago.
It was one of the first video websites ever on the internet, and it was back when people only had dial-up. And on the same day, CBC News launched their video website on the interwebs. It was like back in the old days. So that was Mark led the way in many great ways. So it's exciting to see how much has been accomplished since then.
I think that when you get into this angle of you changed your mind when you were a young girl, if I can use that term without getting in trouble in today's times. you were very young.
I was 16, so
yeah. So you're a young girl there, and at that point, when you started to realize these changes, when your friends had a better take on geopolitics, etc., than your other sort of straight friends, I think this is really where they're coming from. I think this is why your husband was accused of these things, because he wasn't holding a knife to someone's throat. He was merely a purveyor of what people were asking him to bring.
And offering liberty, since cannabis gives us all freedom of our mind, our spirit, our health, our bodies. So, the threat of cannabis isn't the plant itself.
Right.
It's a plant. The threat is that when people use it, they become more peaceful and tolerant and more open-minded and able to put aside prejudice and put aside hate and anger and to be more at peace. And it sounds like a hippy-dippy dream, but it's true. It's real. It makes you question authority. And what I went through is exactly what they don't want the world going through. And all I can hope is that as more and more people approach cannabis from the medical perspective or the recreational, excitement of legalization angle, whatever reason people use cannabis, ultimately, I think it's just going to help us start to question everything, as people already are, with respect to, the government and the system and the way things are. But cannabis it can help with that and healing as well, and dealing with the grief that we have to go through.
It seems obvious because so many of us want to use it and we don't want to go to jail, and so many of us that love us and care about us that don't use it also don't want us to go to jail, and this tiny little nexus of control freaks.
Right, and for what reason? I can't understand why they hate us so much, aside from the fact that I guess we question authority. I mean, that's why they persecute Falun Gong practitioners and harvest their organ. When you cannot be controlled by the state, they really, really hate that. So cannabis offers that sort of freedom and liberty, and that's why there's the war on cannabis during the 60s, and there's history to this. But when I see them demonizing us. And I wake up and I still see the lies and the propaganda and the government sponsored, which means taxpayer funded, but government sponsored misinformation and propaganda that's designed to demonize us, to make us continue to be seen as hedonist, sort of indulgent sinners who can't be trusted not to sell pot to kids just because we aren't the government. It's offensive. It's appalling. And it goes deep, deep, deep into all parts of society. And the fact, like right now while we're talking, sure, there's a lot of people making money on pot businesses and stock market companies, but there are people right now having their kids taken away by Children's Aid because they dare use medical marijuana without a license because they couldn't find a doctor, and how dare they? So this is a horrific war on people that they're using a plant to justify, and arguing about how the marijuana is so bad for our health. I mean, it makes me, I can't believe that the government can call marijuana a threat to public safety and a threat to public health. That's the terminology they're using. And I'm saying, how can you say that? The law enforcers are more of a threat to our public safety and health. They're killing people.
Absolutely.
And so it's distressing. So some days I wake up very mad and fired up. Other days I wake up more in a positive frame of mind. And I think today I'm just a little bit leaning towards the cranky about it
Sure,
side.
well, I understand that. It makes me laugh when I think of this, because you remember in 9/11, shortly after 9/11, George Bush was saying, they hate us for our freedoms. And that was nonsense, but these folks really do hate us for our freedoms. I like to remember every time that the world is so screwed up with constant wars and all the secret wars and going into Yemen and all the announced wars and all the fake reasons for wars, like earlier April this year in Syria, let's give it to them. They're all clear-minded thinking people. They haven't used cannabis. They don't use cannabis. And this world is so designed to have perpetual spiral inflations and wars because those people who are unaffected by cannabis, or so they claim, this is what they've brought to us. This is what we have to labor under. And they tell us that we're nuts for trying to chill out. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Infuriating. So thank goodness cannabis helps us relax, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to deal with this drug war madness.
Yeah, it's great for trauma. And there is a lot of trauma.
Yes.
I played a clip earlier where the police were apologizing for what happened 35 years ago, and they don't see the exact same similar rights. I cited the numbers: 300 people busted, 3,000 people protesting. We're way beyond that now. There needs to be some kind of rallying cry. So let's move forward to we were on our way to legalization, or whatever that's called. And you were in Ottawa giving testimony at the HESA hearings.
The Health Committee, the Standing Committee on Health.
How did you get on that board? What were you telling them? And were you frustrated by what seemed to my observing eyes as being completely ignored?
Well, I was invited by Don Davies of the NDP because he's done a fantastic job trying to defend the cannabis community and call for decriminalization and trying to hold the Liberals to account for their crazy criminalization campaign that Bill C-45 represents, and that's the federal legalization, so-called legalization bill. So Don Davies was wonderful to invite Mark and I to speak and give testimony, and that video is online. Someone actually just tweeted it at me today, so I retweeted it on my feed. So that's it was a great opportunity to speak truth to power, but it's also discouraging to see how little it really matters.
Just
so
ignore
when
it.
the government says they want consultation, they are just going through the motions, really, the motions of democracy. But we do have an impact, because I have to remember that even the fact we're talking about legalization means that they've been forced to have to say they're going to change things. At least there's that. We're right in as much as they've admitted our campaign and calling for legalization is the public sentiment and must be done, but they're trying to not do it as much as they can.
Where they've been fully ignoring it for years and saying, no, that's it, right?
Yeah, mandatory minimums and everything. Just recently, like even Julian Fantino, this ex-police chief, ex-commissioner, he's one of the perfect examples of hypocrisy at its finest, because not only did he enforce the law against people, not only did he support mandatory minimums for cannabis, not only did he compare marijuana legalization to legalizing murder, not only did he say he would never put his name on a marijuana business, what did he do? He's gone and made a marijuana business. He's cashing in. He's not apologizing for the harm done. He's not saying we should stop arresting people. I mean, these hypocrites, these profiteers who got paid by our tax dollars to oppress us and hold us down are now cashing in and denying us the ability to be able to participate. It's incredible. Like, cannabis legalization should have been about reparations and ability for the poor and the marginalized and young women and young men of all these groups that are traditionally left out. They should have had a chance to take advantage of this to create jobs and create business, but the government's not going to let that happen. They don't want to apologize for the harm done, and it's especially offensive, as you noted, that they're apologizing to other groups that they've unfairly criminalized and persecuted. So when's our day coming? When do we get the apology too? We don't. They're still persecuting us now and lying about pot to justify it.
On that note, you were also speaking at that hearing, and you were referencing specifically, because somebody was very upset about it, as per their diktat, that you were supporting evidence that talks about what it does and doesn't do to young minds. But just before we do that, speaking of Julian Fantino, let's not forget, we need to ban Alethea. Alethea, the company brought to you by Julian Fantino. He thinks he's going to profit from his bullshit. You have the power to say no. If you're dealing with Alethea, you're making a mistake. Boycott Alethea and any other business that a former politician or policeman who used public funds is now profiting from. The power lies in your hands. Buy your shit somewhere else. Alethea, designed to coddle a fat pig. Don't go there. Okay, so you were in Ottawa, and you were testifying, and there was a Quebec mayor or something, and they have even crazier laws, I think, now than we do, if you can believe it. But you were talking specifically, and I'm going to listen to you, and so is everyone on the show, referencing this very hot flashpoint. Sorry if that's too bright for you.
The sun is wonderful.
There's a curtain, and we're having sun in November in Toronto. That's incredible.
Nice.
You were talking about a very important point, I think. They always use it. It's a trick. They always use it to talk about children and their minds. And what about the children? We have a segment on the show, and I used a clip of yours at those hearings to explain to everybody how it's not what they say it is. So tell us exactly what the data is, or your understanding of it, because this is a flashpoint for them to go, no, this is terrible, and of course this is a ruse. It's like a puppet show.
Oh yes, they're always using kids, save the kids, as a reason to keep criminalizing adults. And even though cannabis oil is literally being given to children to help them not suffer from epilepsy and other ailments, we're literally saving lives with cannabis for infants and babies and children. So when it comes to teenagers, everyone's going on and on about teenagers and the developing brain, and they shouldn't be allowed to use pot until they're 21 or 25 even, because the brain keeps developing. And I'm thinking, this is insane. You encourage them all to take pharmaceutical drugs that are mind-altering, like the antidepressants I was on and got off of with cannabis's help. But they give these young people all sorts of drugs. They're not concerned about sports and how that affects the developing brain with
CTE,
concussions.
playing football,
Yeah,
sure.
and there's all sorts of ways that young people are being harmed. And so they're trying to somehow paint cannabis as dangerous for young people. But what I wrote to the health committee, and I have it in a brief, it's been posted on their website, and I've shared it around. But I noted that the British Medical Journal had a report on 19 drugs and said that cannabis is the least harmful to everyone out of all these drugs. And the American Psychological Association in 2015 did a study called Chronic Adolescent Marijuana Use as a Risk Factor for Physical and Mental Health Problems in Young Adult Men. But they found that teenagers who use cannabis are no more likely to experience health problems later in life than non-users, even if they're chronic consumers. And then teenagers don't experience IQ loss from cannabis, according to the British Association for Psychopharmacology. In their journal, the Journal of Psychopharmacology of January 2016, they said, are IQ and educational outcomes related with cannabis use? And they studied it, and they said that it doesn't impact IQ. And then finally, we have teenagers and psychosis, the dreaded reefer madness devil, the devil weed that possesses your mind and drives you insane, the insane, evil cannabis and psychosis. Well, the Journal for Adolescent Health in June 2017 studied cannabis use and polysubstance use on psychosis spectrum symptoms, and they found minimal evidence for any association between cannabis use by itself and psychosis spectrum symptoms. They said if teenagers use cannabis and alcohol or cannabis and tobacco or other drugs, there may be issues, but when you remove all those other drugs and it's only cannabis, there are no issues. So I don't understand why or where they're getting this insane information that cannabis is harmful for young people while we still have 5% of the young boys in Ontario on Ritalin, which is speed, and nobody's batting an eye.
Well, yeah, because they don't want to hear you. I was amazed at you had a version of that you actually laid down at the hearings, and they just ignored. Okay, who's next?
Yeah.
Like, there's no comment on this. There's no back and
No,
forth.
because
no
then-
one's saying, now, wait a minute, Jodie, where did you get these numbers? This is fascinating. We've been studying this for years to come up with these laws, and we never heard this.
Well, it gets even more maddening with the driving stuff. Speaking
Oh,
of mad,
right.
mad. They're driving me crazy because they're lying nonstop about cannabis and impairment and cannabis and crashes. And we have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration studied it and said cannabis does not increase the odds of crashing at all. It's like next to zero. And then you have the American Journal of Public Health released a study this summer. They analyzed legalization in marijuana in states, and they found no increase in crashes at all. You hear the government constantly saying, oh, well, they increased the number of people with pot crashing in their cars. And it's like, no, what you're doing is you're drawing blood from these human beings and finding that they used cannabis at some point in the last month and then trying to blame the accident on pot when it's not. It's always alcohol or other factors. But they're detecting cannabis in people. But of course, cannabis shows up long after you use it. So this is just infuriating. And then you also throw in the extra little tidbit about how where you legalize marijuana for medical purposes, you have a 9% decrease in traffic fatalities because people are drinking less and smoking more. So marijuana saves lives, and yet they're trying to tell us it's harmful and dangerous. I just cannot get over, and I feel like I'm going insane. I feel like I'm insane. All of the evidence proves the
Points the
opposite,
other
and they
way.
keep saying, oh, we don't have proof. Oh, well, we have proof. You're just not listening
Yeah,
to
from
it.
Civilized Life, it says Canada's new driving regs could criminalize 200,000 medical marijuana patients, according to a group of 50 defense lawyers recently sending an open letter calling on the feds to rethink the proposal threshold. But of course, they're not going to do that. Let me ask you a couple of quick bullet questions. I know you have to get out of here soon. Really quick, short questions. So this has been pending for a while. You've heard Kathleen Wynne in Ontario and her team. When she didn't even announce it herself, she had a team of the Larry, Curly, and Mo come out. And did you see it happen? Because they came out now.
I was there,
when
actually.
Elon, were you really? I tried to get in.
It's a scene.
When Elon Musk or someone like this comes out with his new Powerwall, or someone has a TED Talk talking about a cool thing, they're always excited about it. They're saying, no, this is going to be great, and this is how it is. And Richard Branson, love him or hate him, we're going to have a new airline. I'm going to have a mobile phone company, love it or hate it. He's always excited. These guys come out shuffling, looking down like they just got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. I mean, how much more? Did they not send them to body language school, or the most people are too clued out to notice this is a scam going down? So they say they've been working on it for a year on that day. 2 days later, the cops come out and say, don't put this through yet. We're not ready. So your preparations didn't involve a fucking phone call to the RCMP, you idiots? So where else have they made mistakes? We're at a place where we've got pending impractical legislation. We've been shown before that impractical legislation vis-a-vis the 2015 vape law, which they pulled off the books the next day because it was impractical, or so they said. Now I can't even count the impracticalities. Let me ask you this. Obviously, they didn't do the work, or they think they did, and it's obviously a bunch of lies. You should really pull up this video clip of the announcement. If I'm changing the paradigms, I'm there, but not sending out my 3 clowns. But I want to ask you this. These folks, the Attorney General, the health guy, all these folks, do you think they're not at all profiting on a sort of an insider knowledge trading basis of like, look, we have the reins of power. We know what's going to come. We know how we're going to shape it. Fuck Jodie Emery and her husband, Mark, and all the other people that understand these facts, and we're going deep pockets like Julian and everything else. How many cops are deeply invested into this on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're busting people today? How many police chiefs, there's a police chiefs association, are investing on it on the one hand because they knew it was coming, and on the other hand, they're busting people. What's your level of awareness of the sick dirt on this topic?
Well, it's perfect you mentioned that, because in about 10 or half an hour, I'm going to be talking to the Guardian UK newspaper about this very subject, because I've just compiled a list when I came and sat down with you here.
Oh, this is great.
I just finished the list.
Now,
of
did we
cops.
talk about this beforehand?
No,
we
at
did
all.
not.
It's
Okay.
serendipity. It's
Go
perfect.
ahead.
So police in the cannabis business. You've got Norman Inkster. He's independent director at Metrum, former head of the RCMP. That's our
Didn't they have a
National Military
contamination-
Police Force.
Did they have a contamination issue at Metro?
Look at this. They did, actually.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
They're
Metrum
one of the
was
many.
one of the bad ones.
Yeah.
So Cash Heed, strategic consultant with National Green Biomed, former BC Solicitor General and West Vancouver Police Chief. Tim Humberstone, ABCAN Director, 20-year member of the RCMP, included roles in municipal and federal drug enforcement and with the Joint Forces Organized Crime Agency. Jake Ryan, Director of Security at Tilray, former RCMP intelligence officer. Kim Derry, Deputy Chief of the Toronto Police and promoter of THC Meds Ontario. Senator Larry Campbell, advisor to Votis Innovative Pharmaceuticals, Inc., also former RCMP and Vancouver mayor and sitting senator. Barry Daniel, Wildflowers head of security, former Abbotsford police chief. Julian Fantino, co-owner Alethea Total Health Network. He was the Toronto police chief, chief of York Region, chief of London, Ontario Provincial Police Commissioner. And his buddy, Raf Sukar, owner of Alethea Total Health Network with Julian and former RCMP deputy commissioner. And Frank Elsner, principal consultant for Umbra Strategic Solutions, security for the marijuana businesses, former Victoria police chief who resigned in disgrace. So there you go. That's a short list of what I have so far.
That's a
if you
short
have
list.
more, send them my way.
Well, great, because of course folks listen to the show, that The Guardian still has an article up that's 16 years old that explains how cannabis is a wonder drug. I don't know if you've seen that one before. Have you seen that before?
No, but I did get to write something for them about Halloween candies and the hysteria about weed in your candy.
It says here that it's a wonder drug capable of radically transforming, etc. It goes on to say that anecdotal is yesterday's news. Because when you get the same anecdote around the world from thousands of people who don't know each other getting the same results, you have to look into it. Listen, I really want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Well, thank
it's
you
been an
so
honor for
much.
me. It's such a thrill that you're here. And hopefully you'll come back. I don't understand where you're always out somewhere.
I'm here in Toronto mostly. Bail
Okay.
conditions require it. So if
Oh,
I
I
got to thank
see.
the cops for anything, I did always say I wanted to live in Toronto. So hey, there you go. Thank you, officer.
And your quick take on January 20th. This is the day that Julian Fantino, same kind of thing, Bill Blair has said we will have up until then to view the pending legislation.
right.
What the frig point is that when they've already passed it through the 3 readings and it only
Yes.
awaits senatorial assent and royal assent?
When Bill Blair, former police chief of Toronto, also the overseer of G20, one of the biggest mass civil liberties violations and arrests in Canadian history. But this guy, he's been telling everyone, you better pass this bill. This is how it's going to be. This is what we're doing. And yes, they're opening up for consultation for 2 months. Now, if we're overwhelmingly bombarding them with cannabis facts and truth, please do. I mean, we really, really need people to take action. You have to engage, even though they're slippery, slimy politicians. They
Yeah.
do govern our lives. And so we have to go try and petition them and lobby them. And right now you've got this 2-month period. I'll make sure I retweet later in the day the link to the
Oh, great.
Canada website so people can
Do
go
that.
find that. But yeah, please have your say, because ultimately that's one of our only tools to fight back against the man peacefully, as we always have done before.
Tools to fight the tools. Sounds like a great idea. Thanks for coming, Jodie. Jodie Emery, everybody. The Princess of Pot. I don't want to hold you up. You can stay if you want. We're going to finish up, but I know you have to leave.
And thank you for speaking out to the premiere as well. That was fantastic.
Oh,
I
thank
loved
you.
watching her squirm, because how dare she support something that harms and criminalizes people like you who have already been through so much, but so many others out there suffering still. You know, they can't stand seeing those smarmy faces lying about cannabis being a health risk and hazard, when people like you and so many others prove cannabis is good for your health, not bad.
I was taken to task by a very tiny percentage of people that I didn't just pull off some quick quip to get her to answer the question. But I have to say the reason I didn't do that is because she was going to give the same answer regardless.
Oh, exactly. That's
and
true.
I just wanted her to be on camera as long as possible until I was forced to ask something, because she doffs off in the House all the time against people that criticize her in the houses, in the legislature, and I just wanted to see her stand there and take this on.
Yeah, no, she's supposed to represent you, so she better stand there and hear you out. So, yes, everyone have your voice heard. And
Okay, well,
thanks
thank
again
you
for
very
the
much
chance.
again. Thank
We'll
you,
see you
Jodie.
later.
All right, that's Jodie Emery, everybody, and what a great guest. Maybe we'll have Mark in sometime. I'm glad you're here, but not for the reason of being held accountable under a ridiculous law such as that. And I know there are a lot of heavy hitter cops involved in profiting from this. It's not up for debate. It's a fact. It's true. But I also know that there's a greater reason a lot of this goes on, and some history never changes. Let's talk about Stephen Bronfman now. Stephen Bronfman has been fingered in the Paradise Papers as a purveyor of funds to Justin Trudeau. It's all in question. This is speculative. But it's true that the Bronfman family is best known to Americans through its ownership of Seagram, the biggest liquor company in North America. Seems to me like this is a template, an old family template, where these folks are using control methods such as influencing governments into power that may not even be legal in the first place. Check out Dope Inc. This is a publication that's been around a long time, hotly contested, but it's hard to avoid the focus on the Bronfman family for pushing through means to get Trudeau into power by outspending the Conservatives and the other folks illegally. This is all something that I'm calling an investigation towards because, these folks, the Bronfman families, they were known to be bootleggers in North America. They had the title of the Bronfman Gang. They came to Canada and got very deep into the profits by selling illegally and rum running back and forth across the border during Prohibition of alcohol. And then when it was finally wide open, there they go, profiting from it and instituting a powerful company because they were already at the trough while they were also behind other people getting busted. This has been going on for such a long time. It's the same old pattern. It's all ridiculous. It's all there for your interest. Download a copy of Dope Inc. Let me spell that for you. DOPE, INC. You'll find it online. It's free now. It's a PDF. Check out the Bronfman Gang chapter on that on page 269 of my particular copy. Take a look at that and read it through and just substitute the word cannabis for the word for the word alcohol. And it's really similar. I think we've got a 2.0 going on here. I think it's time for people to stop thinking that things just happen in the moment. This is a well-run plan. The whole world's tipping this way, and we need to stop it. So, or at least stand up against it and let these folks understand that we're all done with that kind of thing. We don't need that anymore. We're aware of the game that they do, and that's control. So we're going to spend some more time next week getting into the Bronfman Gang, looking at their connections with politics, looking at their success models in the past, and also I am going to get to the rest of Adriana Barton's bullshit piece. I talked about it weeks ago. I covered the first half, and I'm going to cover more because it's part of a brainwashing program. We're all sick and tired of this. I don't take no for an answer from anybody.